We're back to Red Dog from the Jungle Books. Mowgli is taunting the Dahole from up in a tree, showing his bare feet, and they don't like it because they got hairy feet. So pick up with the Dahole's reaction.
Come down, ere we starve thee out, hairless ape!
Yelled the pack, and this was exactly what Mowgli wanted. He laid himself down along the branch, his cheek to the bark, his right arm free, and there he told the pack what he thought and knew about them, their manners, their customs, their mates, their puppies. This is no speech in the world, so there is no speech in the world so rancorous as the stinging language that the jungle people use to show scorn and contempt. When you come to think of it, you will see how this must be so. As Mowgli told Kaa, he had many little thorns under his tongue, and slowly and deliberately he drove the Daholes from silence to growls, from growls to yells, and from yells to hoarse slavery ravings. They tried to answer his taunts, but a cub might as well have tried to answer Kaa in a rage, and all the while Mowgli's right hand lay crooked at his side, ready for action, his feet locked round the branch. The big bay leader had leaped many times in the air, but Mowgli dared not risk a false blow. At last, made furious beyond his natural strength, he bounded up, 7 or 8 feet clear of the ground. Then Mowgli's hand shot out like the head of a tree snake, and gripped him by the scruff of his neck, and the branch shook with the jar as his weight fell back, almost wrenching Mowgli to the ground. But he never loosed his grip, and inch by inch he hauled the beast, hanging like a drowned jackal, up on the branch. With his left hand he reached for his knife and cut off the red bushy tail, flinging the Dahole back to earth again. That was all he needed. The pack would not go forward on Wantala's trail now that they had killed Mowgli. Now till they had killed Mowgli, or Mowgli had killed them. He saw them settle down in circles with a quiver of the haunches that meant they were going to stay, and so he climbed to a higher crotch, settled his back comfortably, and went to sleep. After 3 or 4 hours he waked and counted the pack. They were all there, silent, husky, and dry, with eyes of steel. The sun was beginning to sink. In half an hour the little people of the rocks would be ending their labors, and as you know, the Dahole does not fight best in the twilight. I did not need such faithful watchers, he said politely, standing up on the branch, but I will remember this. Ye be true Daholes, but to my thinking overmuch of one kind. For that reason I do not give the big lizard-eater his tail again. Art thou not pleased, Red Dog?
I myself will tear out thy stomach,
yelled the leader, scratching at the foot of the tree. Nay, but consider, wise rat of the Deccan. There will now be many litters of little tailless red dogs, yea, with raw red stumps that sting when the sand is hot. Go home, Red Dog, and cry that an ape has done this. Will ye not? Ye will not go? Come then, with me. I will make you very wise. He moved, Banderlog fashion, into the next tree, and so on, into the next and the next. The pack followed, with lifted hungry heads. Now and then he would pretend to fall, and the pack would tumble one over the other in their haste to be at the death. It was a curious sight, the boy with the knife that shone in the low sunlight as it shifted through the upper branches, and the silent pack with their red coats all aflame, huddling and following below. When he came to the last tree, he took the garlic and rubbed himself all over carefully, and the Daholes yelled with scorn.
Ape with a wolf's tongue, dost thou think to cover thy scent? They said. We follow to the death.
Take thy tail, said Mowgli, flinging it back along the course he had taken. The pack instinctively rushed after it. And follow now, to the death. He had slipped down the tree trunk and headed like the wind in bare feet for the bee rocks before the Daholes saw what he would do. They gave one deep howl and settled down in a long, lobbing canter that can at the last run down anything that runs. Mowgli knew their pack pace to be much slower than that of the wolves, or he would never have risked a 2-mile run in full sight. They were sure that the boy was theirs at last, and he was sure that he held them to play with as he pleased. All his trouble was to keep them sufficiently hot behind him to prevent their turning off too soon. He ran cleanly, evenly, and springingly, the tailless leader not 5 yards behind him, and the pack tailing over perhaps a quarter of a mile of ground, crazy and blind with rage of the slaughter. So he kept his distance by ear, reserving his last effort for the rush against the bee rocks. The little people had gone to sleep in the early twilight, for it was not the season of late blossoming flowers, but as Mowgli's first footfalls rang hollow on the hollow ground, he heard a sound as though all the earth were humming. Then he ran as he had never run in his life before, spurned aside 1, 2, 3 of the piles of stones into the dark, sweet-smelling gullies, heard a roar like the roar of the sea in a cave, saw with the tail of his eye the air growl dark behind him, and saw the current of the Waingunga far below, and a flat, diamond-shaped head in the water leaped outward with all his strength, the tailless Dahole snapping at his shoulder in mid-air, and dropped feet first to the safety of the river, breathless and triumphant. There was not a sting upon him, for the smell of the garlic had checked the little people for just the few seconds that he was among them. When he rose, Kaa's coils were steadying him, and the things were bounding over the edge of the cliff, great lumps, it seemed, of clustered bees falling like plummets. But before any lump touched the water, the bees flew upward, and the body of a Dahole whirled downstream. Overhead they could hear furious short yells that were drowned in a roar like breakers, the roar of the wings of the little people of the rocks. Some of the Daholes, too, had fallen into the gullies that communicated with the underground caves, and there choked and fought and snapped among the tumbled honeycombs, and at last, borne up, even when they were dead, on the heaving waves of bees beneath them, shot out some hole in the river face to roll over on the black rubbish heaps. There were Daholes who had leaped short into the trees on the cliffs, and the bees blotted out their shapes. But the greater number of them, maddened by the stings, had flung themselves into the river, and, as Kaa said, the Waingunga was hungry water. Kaa held Mowgli fast till the boy had recovered his breath.
"We may not stay here," he said. "The little people are roused indeed. Come."
Swimming low and diving as often as he could, Mowgli went down the river, knife in hand.
"Slowly, slowly," said Kaa. "One tooth does not kill 100 unless it be a cobra's, and many of the Daholes took water swiftly when they saw the little people rise."
"The more work for my knife, then. Fie! How the little people follow!" Mowgli sank again. The face of the water was blackened with wild bees, buzzing sullenly and stinging all they found.
"Nothing was ever yet lost by silence," said Kaa. No sting could penetrate his scales. "And thou hast all the long night for the hunting. Hear them howl."
Nearly half the pack had seen the trap their fellows rushed into, and turning sharp aside, had flung themselves into the water, where the gorge broke down in steep banks. Their cries of rage and their threats against the tree-ape, who brought them to their shame, mixed with the yells and growls of those who had been punished by the little people. To remain ashore was death, and every Dahole knew it. Their pack was swept along the current, down to the deep eddies of the Peace Pool. But even there the angry little people followed and forced them to the water again. Mowgli could hear the voice of the tailless leader, bidding his people hold on and kill out every wolf in Seonee. But he did not waste his time listening.
"One kills in the dark behind us," snapped the Dahole. "Here is tainted water."
Mowgli had dived forward like an otter, twitched a struggling Dahole under water before he could open his mouth, and dark rings rose as the body plopped up, turning on its side. The Daholes tried to turn, but the current prevented them, and the little people darted at their heads and ears, and they could hear the challenge of the Seonee pack growing louder and deeper in the gathering darkness. Again Mowgli dived, and again a Dahole went under and rose dead, and again the clamor broke out at the roar of the pack, some howling that it was best to go ashore, others calling on their leader to lead them back to the Deccan, and others bidding Mowgli to show himself and be killed.
"They come to the fight with 2 stomachs and several voices," said Kaa. "The rest is with thy brethren below yonder. The little people go back to sleep. They have chased us far. Now I too turn back, for I am not of one skin with any wolf. Good hunting, little brother, and remember the Dahole bites low."
A wolf came running along the bank on 3 legs, leaping up and down, laying his head sideways close to the ground, hunching his back and breaking high into the air, as though he were playing with his cubs, It was Won-Tolla, the outlier, and he said never a word, but continued his horrible sport beside the Holes. They had been long in the water now, and were swimming wearily, their coats drenched and heavy, their bushy tails dragging like sponges, so tired and shaken that they too were silent, watching the pair of blazing eyes that moved abreast.
"This is no good hunting," said one, panting.
"Good hunting," said Mowgli, as he rose boldly at the brute's side, and sent the long knife home behind his shoulder, pushing hard to avoid his dying snap.
"Art thou there, man
cub?" said Won-Tolla across the water. "Ask of the dead, outlier," Mowgli replied. "Have none come downstream? I have filled these dogs' mouths with dirt. I have tricked them in broad daylight, and their leader lacks his tail. But here be some few for thee still. Whither shall I drive them?"
"I will wait,"
said Won-Tolla. "The night is before me." Nearer and nearer came the bay of the Seeonee wolves. For the full pack it is met, and a bend in the river drove the Holes forward among the sands and shoals opposite the lairs. Then they saw their mistake. They should have landed half a mile higher up and rushed the wolves on dry ground, and now it was too late. The bank was lined with burning eyes. Except for the horrible feel that had never stopped since sundown, there was no sound in the jungle. It seemed as though Won-Tolla were fawning on them to come ashore and
"Turn and take hold,"
said the leader of the Holes. The entire pack flung themselves at the shore, threshing and squatting through the shoal water till the face of the Waingunga was all white and torn. The great ripples went from side to side like bow waves from a boat. Mowgli followed the rush, stabbing and slicing at the Holes. Huddled together, rushed up the river beach in one wave.
"We will pause there."